Hello, welcome to Story Circles. Here is a new story set in any Caribbean island you can imagine. It's written in honor of our Taino forefathers who cherished this land and lived in harmony with nature. It's called Not Best Friends. Once upon a time on a small Caribbean island, there lived an estate owner and an innkeeper who were neighbors. They each had one son. The two boys, Ted and Dan, became great friends. As they grew older, they would go off on long jaunts. They spent hours each week roaming the estate that belonged to Dan's father. After school one day, they gathered little Y-shaped branches and some old bicycle tire tubing. They carefully crafted slingshots, then set off to see what creatures they could find in the forested part of the estate. Using stones as ammunition, Ted and Dan gleefully targeted a capuchin monkey that would sometimes follow them on their outings. When the monkey retreated so far into the trees that they could no longer see him, they began to shoot at birds. They aimed at parakeets, tanagers, kiskadees, and yellowtails, and they shouted in excitement when they brought a bird down. Their fathers realized that the boys were up to mischief, and they were very distressed. Each said to his son, "If you spend all your leisure time killing birds, you'll grow up ignorant and unruly." Each father advised his son to give up the friendship, saying the other was a bad influence, but each son scoffed at the warning. The boys continued to hunt the birds of the area, and the people of the town began to complain. One day, Ted's father, the innkeeper, decided to take action. He let it be known that he would offer a reward to anyone who succeeded in breaking up the friendship between the two boys. The news of his offer reached the ears of an old Taino woman and her orphan granddaughter Anita. They lived close to the estate in a small house surrounded by hibiscus flowers and wild pink periwinkles. Anita loved the evening visits of flocks of birds and took delight in their noisy feasting. That Friday evening, she and her grandma were out in their kitchen garden when a pandemonium of squawking parakeets broke out above. They looked up in time to see one bird dropping from the group to the ground. A boy bawled out, "Got him, one down, your turn now." Anita's grandmother shook her head. "They make me so furious, the way they disrespect animals. I wish I could do something to stop those boys." Although Anita was a year younger, the boys were well known to students throughout their school. "They're always showing off," she said. "They're always trying to be better, stronger, faster, and smarter than each other." "Oh, really?" said Grandma. "In that case, I have an idea, but I'll need you to help me." Anita's face brightened. She chuckled as she listened to her grandmother's plan, and chuckled again as they shared it with the innkeeper later that evening. "If this works," said Ted's father, "what reward do you have in mind?" Anita and her grandmother smiled together. They both had the same desire to take care of a small flock of chickens. If this succeeds, my men will build you a chicken coop of your own design, and I'll start you off with 2 hens and a rooster." "Agreed," said Grandma. The next morning, as had been requested, the innkeeper sent over 2 of his helpers. Grandma and Anita were dressed in Taino ceremonial wear, with shell necklaces, colourful shawls around their shoulders, and old traditional headpieces decorated with green and blue parrot feathers. Their faces were adorned with thick, bright red lines of ruku paste. Grandma instructed the men to carry on their shoulders a box-like structure that was attached to 2 long poles. Fancy curtains hung around the frame, and inside, on an elegant silver tray, was a beautiful bowl so completely covered that it was impossible to guess what tempting item could be inside. When the men had secured the structure upon their shoulders, Grandma took up a drum and stood at the front, while Anita got a pair of shak-shaks and stood at the back. In this formation, they paraded through the market square, their approach signalled by their unusual music. Eventually, Grandma left the town centre and led the procession to where she knew the boys would be hunting. Dan and Ted heard the coming of the procession and ran up to see what was happening. Recognizing his father's workers, Ted told them to put down their load so that he might take a look. The music stopped, the men placed the load on the ground, and Ted moved aside the curtain. He eyed the bowl and stretched his hand to it. As soon as he lifted the cover, he pulled away and the lid dropped back into place. "Pah!" he said. "It stinks. It's cow dung." "Nah, man, you're joking." Dan brushed him aside. "Let me see." He too lifted away the curtain and the lid of the bowl, and he too drew back in disgust. "Pah! It is dung." The boys stood back and stared at the woman and the girl and at their peculiar attire. "What is all this?" Both Ted and Dan spoke at the same time. Anita's grandma banged on her drum, then answered, "I will explain the meaning of our procession, but to only one of you. Then the one who knows will tell the other." She called the innkeeper's son aside, put her arms around his shoulder and her lips to his ear. She pretended to whisper. In fact, she said nothing at all. Then she let him go and summoned the innkeeper's men and her granddaughter to continue on their way. Dan at once went to his friend and asked what the old woman had told him. Ted replied, "She didn't say anything. She only pretended to whisper." "You're keeping it secret from me," Dan said. "No, she didn't whisper a single word." Ted's voice rose above Dan's. "I see you're not going to repeat what she said." Dan's lips tightened. "We have been friends for so long. How could you not tell me?" "Seriously, she said nothing. Come, let's go find her. She knows the truth." "No way. The 2 of you are plotting against me." Dan's anger showed in his fiercely lit eyes. "You refuse to tell me, so you are not my friend." "You're being stupid," Ted shouted. Dan walked away. Without turning back, he roared, "Don't ever come to my house again." "I don't want to come to your dumb house. Good riddance, you stupid idiot." With that, Ted stalked off in the opposite direction. That moment marked the end of their destructive friendship. The boys avoided each other and began to do well at school, making their fathers very proud. Anita and her grandma had earned their reward, and soon enough they were keeping a growing flock of frisky chickens with dozens of contented baby chicks. If you enjoyed this video, please hit your subscribe button to get more stories for listening and reading.